My guest today had an outstanding career as a sports broadcaster. She is well known for her work covering Chicago sports with Comcast Sportsnet, Fox 32, 670 The Score, and her passion for storytelling continues to this very day. Kerry Sayers. Kerry, as you know, Comcast Sportsnet Chicago, which later became NBC Sports Chicago, sadly is no more. Chicago Sports Network has taken its place. So I'm curious, as someone who was with that network at the beginning, what was your reaction when you heard the news that the network was going to be shutting down?
Sad. They've done such great work, and I was so lucky, along with your professor, to be part of one of the OGs of, the Comcast Sportsnet, and to, help launch that network. It was great. It was so exciting to be a part of and work with so many talented people, covering some great sports teams. And of course, one of the most exciting aspects of that was the fact that in our first year on the air, the White Sox won the World Series. And of course, they were on Comcast, and we were doing pre and post game, and of course, covered their entire run to the World Series. And it was just such a great way to launch. It was obviously a lot of work. I've been a part of several startups, or was a part of several startups during my career. And it was just so rewarding, and to be working in such an incredible sports town with some great sports teams, and talented people both in front of and behind the scenes. It made for a great combination and a great stop, for me, really just to experience all that we did at that time. Um, Again, there's some pretty amazing things that happened along the way. And to think now that after 20 years, and I haven't been with them since 2009, so there was another decade on the air, really decade plus, for them to go through some of the changes and transitions they did, but still be highly respected, and to be one of the leaders for local sports coverage. It's a pretty amazing. Some people that I worked with from the beginning stayed with them for the entire 2 decades of their existence. And so, I tip my hat to them, for all the amazing work that they did and continue to do. And of course, I hope they all land on their feet. Most of them have already.
Seeing the impact, knowing all the great things that that network did over the years for Chicago sports, just looking back now, what does it mean to you that you were able to be a part of all of that?
Well, as I mentioned, I had been a part of several startups, but I think the role that I came here for originally was as co-anchor alongside Pat Boyle. And there was quite a bit of excitement, but also pressure when you're launching a new network like that. And, the management group, um, originated from Philly. And so they were, hiring people for jobs that we weren't native Chicagoans. And I think there was some discussion that it would take us quite a bit of time to win those that were over. And so I think we had a good blend of people who came from various other locations around the US. Some of them were coming back home. Some of them were, kind of born and raised and working in Chicagoland. And then Pat and I were both, native Michiganders. He went to Michigan State, I went to Michigan. And so, the two of us being alongside, being side by side on the anchor desk there for those first, I don't know, 3, 4 years, it was an amazing experience for me. I think, again, also pressure, knowing that we had kind of been warned from the start that we'd need to win people over. And so I think what you do is you ignore that, and you just try to put the best product on the air that you can, and be a good face for the network, both on and off screen. And, I certainly hope that we did that. Pat obviously stayed for much longer. He was there for the entirety of their, 20-year run. And as you mentioned, I ended up going through quite a bit of other stops before, the end of my career, but it certainly was one of the best jobs I had, probably the most responsibility, biggest job that I had along the way. And I was ready for it. And I just felt so grateful to be in such an incredible sports town, one that was certainly on my list. I'm not a person who's ever going to end up in or want to end up in LA or New York. That was never my goal. I grew up in the Midwest, a suburb of Detroit, worked in and around the Midwest for a while, and then headed out west to Seattle to work for Fox Sports Net. And then that's when I came back in. I used to joke that I was part of the Freddie Garcia, Ben Davis trade in 2000, what was that, 2003 or four. And, that was kind of when we were building, I guess it was 2003, we were building towards the launch the next year. And so it was just an incredible experience to land here, a great opportunity. And again, with some very talented people who went on to become the signature faces and voices of the network.
Yep, absolutely. Now let's get into just a bit of your background now. You attended the University of Michigan, and before college, you were at Mercy High School, which is it's an all-girls Catholic college prep school. So going
Yeah.
from that to college in Ann Arbor, what was that transition like?
Well, I think the one thing about going to Mercy, and unless people are from Michigan, nobody really probably knows or cares, but I will say that what I was exposed to was just in general a curriculum and teachers who basically led us to believe and empowered us to feel like we could do anything, that there weren't limitations or restrictions. And so I think that getting that sense of empowerment and, really being handed responsibilities and curriculum and playing sports, frankly, for me, obviously, I grew up as a jock, and really being able to play sports in particular softball, under a coach who locally was written about as being tougher than some of the local football coaches in, basically her coaching style and the way she had us training, which was, we would run and wouldn't even pick up a ball the first 2 weeks of our training camp. Um, I found that really all helped mold me into this person who knew what she wanted to do from the time I was in high school, which was sports broadcasting, and chased after it. And really, you can get a job through connections, but you're not going to keep it if you're not, meant for or strong enough to keep the job, if you're not working hard enough and if you're not delivering. And so I would say that my background there at Mercy and the environment really helped set me up for success and laid a great foundation. And certainly then going off to Michigan, like anyone else, people come from schools of all sizes. And I felt like Michigan was home from the minute I stepped on campus. I looked at Michigan State, I looked at Central Michigan at the time, both schools probably arguably with better communications and, say broadcast reputations and curriculums, but obviously knowing that I got into Michigan, I wasn't going to turn that down. Michigan State felt a little too spread out to me. I think Central was probably a little small for me. Michigan was just right, and it was a perfect opportunity once again to spread my wings and start laying the foundation further for a career in sports broadcasting. I was lucky enough when I was there, my best friend's dad knew the gentleman who at the time was the director of sports information, so the sports information director there, Bruce Made, who went on to much bigger and better things at the school. And I was able to be on press row for anything from women's field hockey to women's basketball, and then branched over into football. And at the time, and I'm really dating myself here, the Fab Five. And I was the student assistant for the Fab Five for 2 years. And that experience of seeing national media at their games on a day in, day out basis, and being a part of those few exciting, incredible, unforgettable years for many reasons. That really was another great launch into my career. And one of the media members that I met during that time is the reason why I landed my first on-air job in East Lansing. It was a gentleman who was working for the NBC affiliate out there, who came to me shortly after I graduated and was doing an internship slash sports producership at a Detroit area station. They were looking for a woman. He told me to drive my tape out. I did, and that's how I landed my first job. So I can say that the connections that I made and the positions that I was in even before I got into the business, helped set me up for success once it was time to actually get a real job in the field.
Definitely. I was reading up and I saw that another really cool thing you got to do during your time in Michigan was you got to interview the legendary Bo Schembechler, and you got to interview him about Title IX.
Good.
I think this was for one of your classes.
It was.
Do you remember what sort of questions you asked him, and you just what that conversation was like?
100%. And it was completely the opposite of what you'd think for an old school guy and coach like Bo. He probably interviewed me and had more questions for me than I had for him. Maybe he was just being politically correct, but I was really impressed at his answers to my questions. That was an article that I co-wrote with another student, and it ended up getting published in the Detroit Free Press. And I feel incredibly proud of that work, looking back on it, what Title IX was back then. I think I only understood at a very rudimentary level how big Title IX was and was going to end up being. And to be able to interview Bo, about something like Title IX and to get his impressions and opinions. And he was basically, one of my main interview sources for that article. And what happened was kind of developed a little relationship out of that because, it wasn't another year, it was maybe another year or two later that I landed that job in East Lansing, Michigan, as I mentioned. And I ended up coming back to the school to cover the golf outing that he'd have annually for his wife who passed of cancer. And there's another fun story from that. I showed up that one of those first years that I was in East Lansing, and I was still playing softball at the time and had taken a head first slide without pants on and was just kind of covered in scabs and big, kind of big patches, band-aids. And I was following him on the golf course, and who is he golfing with? Lo and behold, but Pete Rose. And were very few people probably along the course of my career. You're not supposed to get starstruck, but let's be real, we're all sports fans. So here I'm coming up and I looked and I said, excuse my language, holy shit, that's Pete Rose. Oh my God. And Bo came up and gave me a hug and asked me how I was. And here's Pete. What happened to your knees? What happened to your elbows? And I said, well, I took a head first slide without proper gear. And he was like, no kidding. I always knew I'd had the best day. If I came home with a clean uniform, I knew that I had a bad day at the office. And he's high-fiving me. And I'm just sitting there kind of wide-eyed, like, here's Pete Rose high-fiving me because I took a head first slide without a long shirt or pants. So that's one of my favorite stories. And it was really just um, a very friendly environment to obviously visit with Bo from year to year. And I never ended up being able to meet as high profile as an athlete as Rose was, obviously golfing with Bo, but that's just who he was. He was incredibly friendly. He remembered our interview and it remembered me. And so, I think I got a lot more out of that interview than I had originally bargained for. And again, an article that I still take pride in all these years later.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. Eventually, you went to Buffalo to work for the Empire Sports Network, and because of your work with Empire, you were able to cover the Sabres' run to the 1999 Stanley Cup Final. What do you remember most from that experience?
What do I remember most? Brett Hull's skate in the crease, triple overtime, game 6. I'm still angry about it. I am. Um, Gosh, there's so much that I'll remember. And obviously, it was at the very beginning of my career, so I still felt a little green, but I was doing 14 to 15 hours of live TV during that run. And if you think I'm exaggerating, Empire had us on live more often than not. And I had was living in Cleveland at the time, and I had moved to Buffalo. I had a partner that was in Cleveland, and he stayed there, and I was living in Buffalo, and it was a challenging time personally, but just such a rewarding time professionally. And to be able to be on a beat like the Sabres in a market like Buffalo, with really the organization that owns the network, owns the Sabres as well. So we perhaps got a few more opportunities for interviews, and for maybe other things that other networks were getting opportunities, but having that, partnership really worked well for us. And I just remember hobnobbing with the Darren Pangs and Steve Levy's and Don Cherry's of the world. And here I am again, a little wide-eyed, only at Don Cherry. And I mean, seeing him in person, I mean, just the loud personality, the loud outfits. And back then, the big thing was, oh, wow, ESPN used some of the answers to questions that I asked. That was stuff that, to me, I was super proud of back at the time. It was such a big deal. And um, again, very proud of some of the work that we did. And I had some really good friends that ended up remaining friends coming from that my work there at Empire. And I was only there, I don't even know if I was there 2 years, but it was basically a season and a half, I guess, of hockey. And to be able to cover that Stanley Cup final run, I think we all became these as big of celebrities as the hockey players. I remember, and this had probably never happened to me before. I was in like maybe a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and I heard on the other side of an aisle two teenage girls. Oh my God, that's Kerry Sayers over there. And I thought, what? How do they know who I am? But in Buffalo, the Sabres were king. Actually, the Bills were too, but I came in after the four straight Super Bowl run. Um, and so the Sabres were king, and I was on with them every day. And so it was an incredible experience, just as incredible as was the White Sox World Series run. They both were amazing in their own way. I mean, probably some of the longest days and hours I've ever put in my life, and really that season in general. When it was game day, I'd go to the morning skate. I'd come back to the office. I'd put a story together for my live shot. I'd go home and take a shower, head to the arena, and then I'd be there till 10, 11 o'clock every night. And so that was my life covering them. I was also really lucky to get the opportunity out there with Empire to do a game of the week and for the AHL. And so we were all over Canada. And even AHL games, they're scalping tickets. Preseason games, they're scalping tickets for in Canada. And I remember thinking, I'd love to work in Toronto, which I never ended up doing, but spent quite a bit of time there when I was working for the Sabres, for Empire, and covering the Sabres as my main beat. So there's a lot of memories I have outside of the Stanley Cup final run too, but that run and that team, and Lindy Ruff was their coach, and he was kind of a no nonsense. And there were three women on the hockey beat, all from the various networks in town. And so there were a couple articles written on that phenomenon as well. You'd think Buffalo, not a super progressive town, and yet here we were. So, and just really following the Sabres every day. That's your job as the beat reporter. And so I was with them on Thanksgiving, and I was with them on Christmas Eve when they visited a children's hospital. And actually, I was just telling my daughter that story the other day, because now one of the things that I do is, in my second act, is I host charity events. And I was telling my daughter that one of the events I did last Friday benefited a couple different charities, and one of them is Kids Cancer Camp. And I was telling my daughter about the memory of being with the Sabres on Christmas Eve and being in the hospital, and how I get choked up every time I think of that experience. I even cried when I was there, and I remember the community relations director had to pull me around a corner and basically tell me to snap out of it. That, you had to put on a good face for the kids and the families. And there were babies there in cribs, and some families were there and some families weren't. And it just struck me as one of those moments that I was never going to forget. And watching the players and their wives come to give their time and spread joy at an otherwise very, just probably difficult, challenging time for children and their families. And that made a huge impact on me that day. That whole experience was just really incredible. Like I said, experience wise, making friends, for people that I worked with, I also have a great story that I like to tell when I speak to students or talk to people who want to get in the business. And it's just about a producer that I had there who really took the time, because let's face it, like preparation now for a job in sports broadcasting, now there's courses on how to call games and how to cover games, being a sideline reporter, the business of sports. Back then, you were largely doing things. I was largely self-taught. I was doing a prep football classic game in Detroit with these high school teams and doing all this research and doing 4 games in one day and kind of just, doing what I thought I should do without anyone really telling me how to be a sideline reporter. But I had a producer who in Buffalo would call me down to his office almost every day after my work or a live shot. And I would call it the walk of shame down to his office. And yet what it was is him taking the time to let me know, hey, you do this shoulder shimmy, or you say blank as a way when you're searching for your words or you're looking to transition. And because of his, just his mentorship and breaking things down for me on a daily basis, it really just helped mold me into a better broadcaster, more aware, and just so many things on so many levels. And I remember the day he called me down and I thought, oh God, what did I do this time? And he sat me down and he said, you've got it. And I said, what? And he said, I think you got it now. I think you got it. And I don't think I've ever had anyone outside of, say, some really amazing videographers that I had the opportunity to ride alongside, my work husbands, as I like to call them, that took the time when, I was coming up along the way to teach you how to stand, what the angles should be, what hand you hold the microphone in. And so John DeMerle was his name, and I really credit him for my growth. And I had others along the way who just didn't do it quite the same way and weren't quite as kind or constructive. Their criticism wasn't as constructive. And that was such a learning time for me all around. Again, another stepping stone that helped lay a foundation for bigger and better jobs to come.
Yes, for sure. And you've said before that your time with Empire is really when you learned how to become a broadcaster. What was that process like for you as you're refining your skills and you're getting better with more reps, and more reps?
Well, and that's part of it. And I think I just mentioned that John's mentorship, that John calling me down to his office. And really, it was only my second job in broadcasting. I had worked for the NFL Trust, bringing a team back to town in Cleveland for a while there. Um, After my job in East Lansing, I moved to Cleveland again for a relationship. And I had ended up working with the NFL Trust, bringing a team back to town, and then was doing some things locally with Fox Sports Net there after I came back from Buffalo, and I did some on-field stuff for the Browns during the games. But in between, when I was looking for something, I kind of lost the growth and this just kind of had taken the first steps in that first job, and I was pretty much a weekend anchor doing everything by myself, doing some shooting of Friday night football game, high school football games, and doing my own editing, and really just learning how to be a good producer. And then, the part that I wasn't really able to focus a ton on was the on-air anchoring and things like that, because I was so busy and so slammed getting shows together, that when I stepped into the role in Buffalo, um, that what I was able to do there was really take those steps to being, to putting on my big girl panties and being in a big job, where instead of doing maybe a couple live shots a month, I'm live every day. And really, when you're getting those reps and someone's telling you what you're doing wrong, and you have all this, material to look through, and again, to sort through and figure out what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right. It was never my research. I mean, my research was amazing. And sometimes I'd have to do a 7, 8 minute interview with the opposing coach coming in to do a scouting report, so to speak. And the coaches would say, have you covered us for a while? And I used to take pride in that because my preparation was great. It was the stuff on the air, learning to be a better on-air personality. Maybe some information that wasn't necessarily needed. So it wasn't the prep, it was the actual on-air part, and just learning how to do that. When in my first job, I, yes, had been doing some anchoring and I was filing reports, but the amount of live work that I was doing on a daily basis was pretty new to me. And so again, to your point, it was reps, it was John, it was some of my colleagues, it was everything. So
Definitely. Now, throughout your work, something that really stands out to me is your storytelling. With with your feature packages, your interviews, you just know how to tell a captivating story. Now on YouTube, there's a feature you did with the young LeBron James, which is super cool.
yeah,
Um,
that's still circulating. And what, let me see, that had to have been 20, how many years old would that be? Maybe 18 to 20 years old. It was when he was still at St. Vincent, St. Mary. So he was what, a junior maybe? So yeah, I was there. That's another great memory, and funny because he was obviously bound for great things, destined for great things. But to think that I was there when he was a junior at St. Vincent St. Mary with, his group of 4 or 5 friends, and one of his buddies' dads was the coach there. That was also another pretty incredible thing. But yeah, I think just again, it's all about. I focused on, which many of us do probably. I focused on a lot of writing because Michigan didn't have like a great broadcast curriculum or department per se. And so I had always heard, take writing classes, having a strong writing background will help you. And then you get into the business and you're basically told to write to a third grade audience, which is hilarious. Um, but it's hard to tell a story quickly. And I was always lucky that I worked for sports networks along the way until the end of my career, where you've had 2.5 to 3.5, sometimes longer to do. I did some documentary type stories, and you have 20 to 30 minutes to tell a story. And so, you know, I was lucky in that I had more time to tell stories. But I liked feature stories. I liked being out and getting the story behind the story. And I'm still captivated by people who do it well. And there's sometimes a formula you can follow with sports, and getting out of that is sometimes difficult because you're so used to having to do something quickly, and you're doing just the thing that everyone kind of expects you to do. Finding the story behind the story or the sidebar story that's going to be more interesting, or telling it in a slightly different way. Again, I still, when I'm watching TV or when I've worked with people in the past and really respect their style, you try to emulate it. And so I think it just takes time. It takes watching a lot of TV. It takes, picking and choosing the people that you feel like you'd like to emulate their style, and yet you still want your own twist on things. And so I still love to tell stories, as you said. Um, I think that's part of who I was meant to be, whether it's written or broadcast word, or in my new business, to what you've mentioned, my video production business, where I tell I do legacy videos and help tell other people's stories and allow them to leave something more to their loved ones when they pass. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, what does it mean to you that you're able to continue telling stories today with Forever Yours?
I think everyone kind of lands in the place they're meant to be, even if it's a painful process along the way. I didn't love the departure and my departure and the way that it happened from Comcast Sportsnet, but everyone loses jobs and opportunities, and they were going in another direction. What that opened me up for was a chance to work for Fox there, in Chicago, here in Chicago, and uh, 670 The Score and the Big Ten Network, and and really just to have a great ending to my story, and really an opportunity when I ended up saying goodbye to the business, at least sports broadcasting, when I was married and having my first child at a later date in my early 40s, and finally made the decision to turn away from an opportunity to return in more of a full-time capacity. for an offer that was on the table from Fox. And I made the call to finally call it quits so that I could spend time as a mom and as a wife and do some of the things I really didn't have the opportunity to do along the way. And so now in my second act, um, I am both hosting charity benefits as an MC and sometimes helping with the fundraising as an auctioneer. I also have the business called Forever Yours Legacy Videos, which was launched coming out of the pandemic, really for the reasons were twofold. Working for Weigel Broadcasting and a network that at the time rolled into the pandemic, and we pivoted and were doing stories about women who were the first to do something in their field, and then how the pandemic affected them, and hearing similar stories from them on, losing opportunities when they lost their parents or a parent or a relative, a loved one to COVID, and they never got the time to, have final words or, leave everything on the table, where they were hearing stories about their loved ones for the first time at their funeral. And to me, it was an opportunity to allow people to leave something behind rather than material things or money. And so I just feel lucky that it's given me an outlet. It feels like a passion project along with being a business to, I've learned something from every interview. They've been incredibly touching and memorable in every way. There's now some crossover that I've been doing between doing mission videos for some of the events I'm hosting, and also, that's through my production business, and that's really a crossover that I hadn't really considered when I first started. And so I've got this opportunity to really help organizations meet fundraising goals and help organizations, some of the best organizations from Northwestern's Comprehensive Cancer Center to Camp One Step, which is a cancer camp for children, to DuPage Foundation here in town, which is basically funnels donations in and then channels them out to organizations in need in DuPage County. I could go on and on. From Hinsdale Humane Society, I've done fashion shows. And so what that allows me to is to kind of keep my hand in kind of a philanthropic pot. I met my husband volunteering at a soup kitchen. And so he and I still have lots of connections to and like to give our time and talents and funds to organizations that are so worthy in town. And so I just really feel like people end up where they're meant to be with the business Forever Yours, and some of the stories I've been able to tell there and share these gifts that are priceless for families, and to also help organizations and feed my passion. I guess I won't say for performing, but for philanthropy, and also being able to be up in front of people and, I guess perform, you could say. And I'm also doing some commercial work these days. And so being a free agent has its benefits, and I've enjoyed doing different things. And also, as I mentioned, being able to help organizations in need has really, fed me in a way and just filled my cup in a way that I couldn't have imagined when I left the business, wondering if I was done and what was next.
Definitely. Now, last question here. You're also a mother. So, what's that journey been like for you, raising your kids and watching them grow up?
Well, Sam, I think I'd be lying if I didn't say that there was always kind of that tug. When you're in a business like sports broadcasting, and I've watched, colleagues that have kids that were younger than me that have done it. And to me, it was always kind of not an all or nothing, but there's so much energy and time, from research to the time you're spending at the ballpark or the arena, that you need to give to the job, that I feel like there were always these other parts of my life that I envisioned but wasn't really sure when or if they would come into my life. And to have met my husband right after I was let go from Comcast and parted ways with them. And then to meet him and then end up married within a few years and finally having kids, as an older mom, I now have a 12 and a 9-year old, a 12-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. And it's such an amazing experience and part of life. And when people say, do you miss it? Of course I do. I mean, as a sports fan, um, being part of that world, it was a dream, but it also was a lot of work. It wasn't as glamorous as it probably seems from the outside. And, really, again, you're putting so much into your job that, there were a lot of women that I worked with that, really didn't have serious relationships or, that were married with kids and struggling with the time on the job and time traveling with teams. So I feel lucky that I ended up being able to have a couple kids even that late in life and to find a life partner that, now is very happy to allow me and, support me in doing some of these things in my second act. I'm coaching. My husband and I both coach. I've coached my daughter's house league softball team for a number of years, and now I've been an assistant on her travel teams the last 3 years. My husband and I have coached her school basketball team, and he's now coaching my son's travel basketball team. And so the two of us, as former athletes, I think we've channeled the coaching aspect into feeding into our competitive drive. We have two very sports loving and sporty kids, and so I love that aspect of our family, that our kids are as athletic and involved in sports as we both were growing up. And it's a lot of work and it's a huge investment. And I just feel fortunate that I was both able to live out my dream job for more than 2 decades. And, now am enjoying life as a parent and a coach for them and just being here for them in a way that I think had I continued in that field would have been difficult.
Thank you so much for letting me have this opportunity to chat with you today. It was just such an honor. Yeah, and just thank you so much. I truly appreciate it.
Of course, it was great to meet you, Sam, and I appreciate you having me on.